Okay. Hello, welcome. Sorry about that. I'm just getting to grips with a Mac, but it's working, which is good. My name is Mark Bloomfield, and I'm visiting professor up at the University of Hertfordshire in the School of Creative Arts, where we run a facility called the Digital Hack Lab. And this is Shaun. He's going to introduce himself. We're ad-libbing.
Yeah, what?
We're ad-libbing.
Ad-libbing. We're ad-libbing. Yeah, I'm Shaun Borstrock. I'm the Associate Dean of School at the University of Hertfordshire in the School of Creative Arts for Business Innovation and Projects.
So the university was kind of getting its toes wet, I suppose, dipping its toes in the water with 3D printing a few years back. And we sort of invested in initially some FDM machines, some little desktop machines, and we also had access to some of the, what then was the old sort of object machines, which I believe now are owned by Stratasys, so the ones that use the resin. And we got a large EOS laser sintering machine in as well to sort of add into that mix. And we're kind of looking and exploring different projects and how we could begin to kind of realize this technology. Shaun sort of posed the question. He said, well, can we 3D print clothes? So he sort of let that sort of cat out the bag, and that was something which then sort of preoccupied us for quite some time. And it's quite complicated when you actually kind of think about the technology that you're dealing with and the end result in terms of somebody being able to kind of walk around in something that fits them and doesn't fall apart and ideally moves. So there are a lot of challenges that we had to overcome. Part of where we started was initially looking at talking to other practitioners. So Shaun's background is in fashion. So one of the early conversations that we had was about fluidity and wanting to have that sense of drape. So that the actual material itself, had some characteristics. We initially looked at chainmail, as Mark sort of suggested earlier. That was one of the main sort of growth, I suppose, areas around the idea that you could quite quickly produce linked sheets, which we did. So we kind of looked at a few different options. One of the things, because we were looking at covering the body, we wanted to try and reduce that gap between our links so that we got something which was kind of as close-knit as possible. So that it wasn't see-through. We wanted something which was going to ideally cover the body. So the initial kind of tests that we put through were, really, really lovely. We kind of picked this one of the ones at the end, which was sort of linking across the corners, and this is what came out. So we were quite excited about that because it had all those lovely kind of tactile qualities. We printed it on the SLS machine. We also printed it on the object machine. So this gave us a different sort of material. The benefits of the SLS is that the powder supports the build, so you can be quite sort of experimental with your geometries and not really have to worry about cleaning it up afterwards. Obviously, with the object machine, there's a support build of a soluble resin that comes in, so that then needs post-processing afterwards. But it has a very sort of different feel. It's a little bit sort of, it's not as fluid. It's got a little bit more stickiness, I suppose. So that was the initial start point. That's where we started looking. And the next problem was obviously, how do we now take something like that and actually make it fit somebody? So at that time, Nervous Systems were doing lots of great stuff with using physics to actually basically you're getting into the terminology where you've got a lot of rigid body links that are linked together, and then you use physics and gravity to actually position those within the build volume that's available to you through your 3D printer. So it means that you can kind of start taking quite extraordinary sort of patterns and shapes in the 2D sense, treating them as a flat pattern as you traditionally would in sort of fabric garment construction, and then drop them into, in this instance, a very, very simple cube that was the same build volume of the printer, so that it will all crumple up and you would get something which hopefully would then go through the machine and print. So we did a little bit of experimenting, and this is what came out. So excuse the scaling, but that was also an issue with the... but basically, this was our first test piece, and I took this and then just basically in the software got it to collapse so that it would basically form a nice little, So that's what was printed, and then we were hoping that obviously when it then came out, we would have the full, all-connected sheet. But you can see there are some problems. We've got links. Within the physics itself, the solver wasn't able to capture these links and maintain them in a relationship. So they kind of fell out. And it was when we were sort of handling this that it was kind of like, well, if I could just take these links and just kind of click them together again, then I could use them. Because obviously this has come out, this is now waste. So ideally we don't want to waste something. So it's that simple observation that then gave us this, where we're dealing with a tiny little link, basically, whereby on the back side the links are open. This allows you to then connect and disconnect links at will. But it means that we can still print it as a sheet. So we would then just scale it up according to how big the print bed is, and then print sheets, stack them all up on top of each other, let the machine run for the weekend, and then come in and we'd have loads of, by the time they're all dusted down, we basically have sheets of material. And because it's got if you look closely on the back, you can see that the actual little arms are open, which means that you can then just disconnect it. So you can... Shaun's got a real sort of knack for this, so it's probably...
Very quickly, without getting bloody fingers, you can just disconnect it and then reconnect it in any configuration.
Yeah. So, this was something that was quite, exciting, because we were then able to make stuff with it, make clothes. So we were able to, I say make these quite quickly, but this was, I suppose, a process of experimentation of getting sheets of fabric and then starting to, Shaun talked a bit about the process of kind of taking...
Yeah, so, my interest is in body draping, fabric, and how we could manipulate our fabric into clothing. What I found frustrating with what we've sent round is that I couldn't do anything with it. Yeah, it looked great, but other than sewing the things together with thread, wouldn't have allowed me to have made a piece of clothing. So, with my, hopefully with my draping skills in fabric, proper like textile, I was then using a model, a mannequin, a dressmaking stand, to manipulate the fabric, but also manipulate each one of the links so that they would form, take on the shape of the curve of the body. And what was amazing is that we then started experimenting with colour, with the impact of colour, with stones, with the frontage of each of these things. So we've now, Mark has figured out a way of designing the fronts for completely different fronts. So we did one for Mercedes-Benz with their logo on it. We've got a stone set. We've got different scales. We've got a small, medium, large of the, I suppose, the traditional node clicks. And then we did collaboration. So the middle is a collaboration with what's his name? With the graffiti artist Ben Hine. And it's just allowed us to do some amazing things. But what was more amazing is when we put it on somebody's body, and they've been worn loads of times. We've done many, many fashion shows. People have worn them to Ascot, and they come away saying that it's really comfortable. I've never worn any of them. Not sure they quite suit me. No, I've not ever worn anything, but I think we were both quite surprised that when people came in for fittings, they put them on and they said, "Oh, these are really comfortable." And somebody went a couple of women have worn them to Ascot, and she said it rained and it was fine because it didn't really bother me because it didn't affect the garment and, you know, just stayed as it was. But the fact that it's comfortable, which when you kind of do this, it doesn't really feel that comfortable, but when it's on the body, I think it does something quite different. So, yeah, I mean, that was reassuring in itself. So I think it's now about being able to, you know, to just take it to the next phase. But the customizable, bespoke nature of it kind of lends itself to craftsmanship, dyeing craft, traditional, you know, and technological innovation, all those sorts of things, which make it really exciting, I think, for us to pursue.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and I think it was something which at the beginning we weren't really anticipating any of this, so it was very serendipitous in terms of the, I suppose, the experimentation once you've got the material, and then you start playing with it, you know, and then you begin to kind of develop a relationship with it, and because it's tactile, anybody can sort of start playing and linking. Jonathan's very fond of calling it, you know, it's like Lego for clothes. So, you know, it's about having that same sort of building sort of mentality where it's very accessible in terms of what you can do. And there aren't really anything, you know, in terms of what you shouldn't do with it. It's more being about, you know, we're taking out links and then trying to kind of knit them back together again in order to get, you know, a taper. We're kind of putting them together where we've got full corners so that we can actually start to get forms. You'll see outside we've got some which essentially use, you know, interesting, it's just, you know, also what you're doing is just that sort of idea of restriction so that you can then begin to kind of generate, you know, soft forms which become quite sort of tactile and quite therapeutic. So there's also then, you know, links to, you know, medical applications or even just sort of, you know, little support fabrics. You know, they're really nice to play with because they just give something back. And there's also that, you know, I suppose, yeah, it is digital. We're using some, you know, very, very sort of cutting-edge techniques and technologies, but it's also connecting it to, you know, what is, I suppose, traditional craft skills. With the Z dress, for example, and the cat upstairs, if you go up to see, we've got a couple of dresses up where the special exhibition is. So it's kind of that whole sort of idea of, okay, we've got a pixel grid, and so what's the resolution on our pixel grid, and how big is this Z, you know, and how many colours do we need to pick in? So there's a lot of handwork that actually went into describing that.
Days' work.
And then, you know, dyeing all the different colours themselves, then putting them all together in order to get that as a piece. And I think, you know, there's a real value in that because people, when they're looking at it and they kind of think, wow, you know, it's the same with this, you know, with this next one, for example, there was like 20,000,
18,000
stones. So, you know, every single one of them was put in by, you know, we put them all in by hand.
Yeah, funny.
And, you know, again, we've got a very different look, different feel, combining sort of off-the-shelf kind of components and making, you know, we can basically make fittings on the actual material itself, so it can begin to take a load of different ready-to-buy other components that can enhance it, add a bit of sparkle. But I think one of the most, you know, one of the best things, and obviously we've been talking a lot about sustainability and about circular economy, but the idea that, you know, with this, we have made garments, and some garments no longer exist in that form, whereby we've actually been able to, you know, take them apart, turn them into something else. It's also with regards to fit, so it might be that we've had a model or a customer wearing a dress. We can just take out material in order to fit them. They want it a bit longer, we can just add a bit of material onto the bottom. So there's, I suppose, some real sort of benefits to actually kind of thinking about this as being something that has, you know, a life in that it can continue to be used and reused. To the point where, you know, we started doing cushion covers, the sculptural objects, upholstery, you know, would be quite good because you can get a nice corner and it's quite hard wearing. There's all sorts of different applications that we have started to become aware of. So it's kind of, yeah, it's exciting. Just quickly to then, you know, that's Motrix. We sort of then hit, as everybody did, sort of lockdown, and things kind of, we were talking about the sort of next stage, and also just looking at, as Marcus sort of, you know, EOS, you know, we've got a PA 12, PA11 is more of a sort of starch, castor oil-based nylon. But then I was also getting back into FDM printing, so the little desktop machines, looking at what you could do with those. And I've not used one in a few years, was surprised at how it had come along. Was really impressed with the actual performance, and so started to kind of think about how could I also use this in a similar sort of way to producing, a modular link that would give us the same kind of, I suppose, system as MoClix does in its nylon guise, but this is very much about making it sort of accessible through, the whole sort of printer network and maker spaces and things like that, and to kind of make it quite simple. So I just sort of came up with these two links, which they're quite small, but when you actually kind of tuck, the tail of one into the head of the other, you can start to kind of build new shapes. And then because these are thin, they print very quickly. There's no support material. But then it's also thinking about it from the context of this is obviously when you link these together, you get this kind of form. But then if you sort of put this in hot water and put a weight on it, you get something which is flat. So you can start to sculpt with it, and it becomes much more sort of tangible and workable as something which is more of a different kind of textile. And we've got two different shapes on this one. We've got a square and we've got a triangle, which is quite nice because this gives you, again, a different look. But when you start to combine the two together, you can start to get sort of geometry, so you can start to get sort of geometric shapes. So, it's early days for this at the moment, but we're just kind of, exploring that as the next stage. Some images. It's also outside, so you can have a little feel and see what you think. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you to my friends Mark and Shaun. If you haven't been up the stairs to the special exhibition yet, you must go up there and look at the MoClix on the mannequins. I think what I find so lovely about those garments that are up on the mannequins is that you just look at these garments and they are exciting in their own terms. You don't need to know anything about the technology that's made them. They're just damn interesting. And that is a testament to their success in that they're not relying on the technology that's made them to make them interesting. They're just interesting in their own right.